I'm that weird fan who likes every Metallica thing, though. So I'm like the person, every
the Lou Reed album that they did.
Oh yeah, I genuinely really, but because I'm a big fan of bands and musicians who don't do the same thing over and over again, and thank the Lord of rock and metal that we have bands like Metallica who go, you know what, we're so successful, we can do what the hell we want and keep life interesting.
Amen to that. I agree.
Because if every band and musician played it safe, it would be an incredibly boring planet to live on. And the reason Metallica are so big is because they take chances. I genuinely believe that. If they had not done the Black Album, they would have been forgotten about very quickly.
Hello, dear friends and listeners, everyone. I am Siobhán Cronin here as always with Ben and Corey, and we are excited to come back for another episode of 2020 with our dear friend, British Ambassador Richard Shaw, one of our original guests, currently of Richard Shaw and all the things that he does, formerly of Cradle of Filth that we've talked about on all of our prior episodes. So I'm really excited to dive back in with you and talk about the things that are going on. Maybe get a little more topical in this episode, just kind of riff here as we do on 2020. We're excited to have you back as always.
I'm excited to be back. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I've missed you all.
We've missed you as well.
We might just sit here and riff is our code for, we don't have a plan. We don't know what's going on.
It's a chat.
It's a chat.
Well, we've gotten into the fourth level of talking, which is like, you know, we no longer need to cover like, what have you done in your life? Now it's like, we just get into, you know, all the depths of anything and everything.
Let's pick up where we stopped off, because when Richard came on, he was like, oh yeah, I'll talk to you. And I don't think any of us fully internalized how big of the news it was, because you had just left Cradle of Filth and we were your first interview, which by the way, makes us feel warm and fuzzy inside. And we thank you for that. What was it like after you got off the show? Because I have to tell you, my Google feed blew up so much with you and us that I had to unfollow everything to do with us.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. In all honesty, I think I was maybe too honest.
Impossible.
if that's a thing. And it got very interesting for a while. People taking like little bits of the interview, taking it out of context, or even putting it in the right context and turning it into a bigger thing than what it was, and all this kind of stuff. So it got a bit interesting in about a week following the.
It's called media, dude.
Exactly.
It's called journalism. I'm cutting up shorts of this show, and I am so egregiously taking things out of context. And it's fun. I put like absolutely radical things. Like Kanye West is a crazy person. And it's like, it's kind of the gist of it, but it's not exactly what I said, but it works, right? So it's for news. It's clickbait. It's like, Rick, you know what we should start off this episode? What does Richard think about Pantera? And now we'll get blabbermouth all over us.
Even if we don't even talk about it. The very fact you've just said that.
Richard Shaw doesn't want to talk about Pantera. That's the headline.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it works.
Got to get those advertising dollars.
Yeah.
I'm actually curious. So, you know, like we said, after our last episode, there was a bunch of quotes and stuff, and the blogosphere and all the metal news kind of went nuts there. But honestly, how long did that last for?
Yeah, it was probably about 2 days where I kept getting tagged in things, and even pages I follow, there's my face next to Danny's. I'm like, oh God, that's awkward. And yeah, obviously things get back to the band and all this kind of stuff. So it was kind of that kind of thing where it got a bit dramatic for a little while after that, where it was like, okay, now that everything's died down, I'm starting to hear what people may have heard, like from people it may have affected, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So you're kind of thinking, oh man, maybe I was a bit too honest and stuff. But then again, it's like, well, it's not my problem anymore.
Were we talking about you leaving Cradle of Filth, or the fact that you are with Mark, where it says that men only dress up with like makeup and play sweep arpeggios for other men or something like that? There was a really cool article about you guys that black metal people only impress other men.
I forgot about that.
That was my favorite article of the year, is that it's a picture of Richard and Mark on the cover of Metal Injection, and it says, people only dress up in black metal costume and to impress other black metal guitarists, and I thought that was great.
Well, it's true. That's the only reason we do it. We don't do it for the music. We don't do it for the money. We just want to impress other guys. No, that's why I found the whole thing hilarious. Like, I actually know the guy who posted it originally, and I just messaged him, was like, dude, and he was like, did you have to use me and Marek, really? And he was like, I thought you'd find it funny. I was like, I do, but context is everything. Come on. But we had a good laugh about it. And again, that lasted all of a day. And if anything, me and Marek got like more Instagram followers from it. So I don't.
From a bunch of black metal dudes.
So from more black metal guitar players, which is already pretty niche. So we got even more followers in a very, very niche field.
Kronos from Venom said that's not true.
Is that another clickbait thing?
Probably.
I don't know, but it could be.
It could be.
Let's see how many clickbait things we can slam into this episode.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious. What do you think of Pantera?
Yeah, what do I think? It's like, what does Corey Taylor think? Like, if it becomes what does Richard Shaw think? That could have been a hot topic for a little while.
Well, let's see. What does the guy that wears makeup for other dudes think about Pantera's reunion? Which, by the way, is a tribute.
Yeah. I love Pantera. They're one of my all-time favorite metal bands ever. And I have no problem with the tribute. And there you have it.
In the words of Richard Shaw.
Surely that cannot be taken out of context. I don't, because the way I see it, I'm one of those unlucky fellows who never got to see Pantera, despite being one of my all-time favorite bands. I never had the chance. By the time I got really into Pantera, they very rarely toured the UK. And when they did, it was more like a festival show. And I was still relatively young to go to festivals. So in 2004, when such tragedies happened, I was like 19 thinking, well, that's it. I'll never hear these songs live ever again, unless it's by a shitty cover band. But, this is the next closest thing. In the same way that I'm a huge Queen fan, and I was one when Queen stopped touring. I was 1 year old, so there was no chance I was ever going to get to see Queen. So when they came back with Paul Rodgers and then again with Adam Lambert, I was like, well, at least I get to hear these songs performed with some of the guys in the band. So that's the way I see the Pantera tribute.
Well, they call Queen and Adam Lambert or Queen and Paul Rodgers, and that's because, the most unmistakable part of a band, for the most part, is the vocalist. So you can't replace Freddie Mercury, so they say Queen and Adam Lambert. But let me ask you this. If Brian May had died, and Freddie Mercury was up there at 60-something years old or what have you, singing, do you think they'd still call it Queen and they just find a Brian May guy? I do. I personally think because he's the guy that's you can't, because Freddie Mercury, you can't 100% imitate him. There's a guy named Mitch Martell that actually sounds identical to him. So it's pretty scary. But for the most part, as a singer, like if Phil Anselmo was dead, but then they had Dime and Vinny, it still, to my ears, would sound weird because it's not Phil, because he's the singer. There's something about being a singer. But, I think if Queen, if Brian May had died, that they still call themselves Queen. This is a weird, fictitious universe that I'm just inventing right now. But it upsets me because I saw Pantera 8 times in life, and I was lucky enough to meet Dime.
You asked a question about 40 seconds ago and then answered it.
I'm learning about interviewing. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I'm curious. Go with your train of thought. I'm enjoying your train of thought.
Well, okay. So I saw Pantera a bunch of times live, and I thought they were freaking amazing. And obviously, it's like Van Halen. It's a really good analogy. If Alex Van Halen died and Eddie Van Halen died. But here's the thing. David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar and Michael Anthony, it's arguable that none of them are as integral to the band as Phil Anselmo. And honestly, Rex is a huge deal, but and those guys wrote the songs too, because that's another thing. It'd be one thing if Dimebag and Vinny had written all the songs, but Phil and Rex wrote all of those songs too.
The Van Halen thing is unique though, because you could go see, Dave and Sammy perform as solo artists doing Van Halen songs. So you kind of get to a preview of what that was like, and it wasn't the same.
Well, Phil and the Illegals wasn't the same for me either. I mean, Zakk Wylde, there's something about Zakk and then Charlie. Because, I mean, listen, the first time I saw Pantera as a headlining act was with Anthrax. And all those guys came out on stage. Those dudes were buds. And Charlie, even when I was a kid, I used to think Vinny and Charlie, those were the dudes for me. So, and it's crazy too, because I DJ'd John Danae's wedding. And the only guy that wasn't there was Charlie. And I'm like, why isn't Charlie here? He's practicing with Pantera. Give me a real reason, John. And I went and I saw the shows online. I was skeptical. I'm sitting there like the dude with the black jacket on with my arms crossed. All right. And then you go watch the video from them in Chile. And it's like 60,000 people jumping up and down, like the craziest concert you've ever seen. And it sounds awesome. And to be honest with you, in seeing Phil 8 times, drunk as a skunk, high as a kite on pills, he never sounded as good as he sounds now, because he used to run around and drink booze and all that. He kind of stands there or sits like Phil Collins in his chair, but he sounds perfect. So for me, obviously it doesn't have Vinny and Dime. I think Charlie's, I don't want to say interchangeable, but like, God damn it, he sounds like a Ouija board. And Zakk Wylde isn't Dime, but if there is a guy that can do the Dime thing and not offend, and he went drinking with him and he sounds awesome, it's Zakk. And he doesn't even play it note for note. There's a girl who's 17 who plays closer solos to Dime than Zakk does. But it doesn't matter because it's Zakk fucking Wylde. And when I went and saw that show, sat for 75 minutes through the bootleg, I was crying. And I said, I'm so glad that a whole new generation is going to love this, because now all of my songs will be cool again.
So this episode is now titled "What Ben Thinks About Pantera."
That'll be the.
Sorry, I won't talk for the rest of the episode.
No,
I'm not talking.
I'm just kidding.
No, I 100% agree with Benny in the sense that I have guitar students now who are getting into Pantera. Like kids who are hearing Pantera for the first time.
Right now.
Because they're like 14, 15. They got into guitar through whatever was popular at the time, maybe like Taylor Swift, Ed Sheeran. And then all of a sudden they start picking up the guitar and they go, okay, I've heard of this band called Metallica from like an older relative or something like. And then now it's like, okay, now they're into rock and metal. And now they're hearing this name Pantera popping up everywhere on social media. And this conversation people are having of, should this tribute happen? Should it not happen? There's almost like this weird chasm that falls down the middle, is people are getting into Pantera or they're rediscovering Pantera again.
Well, it's kind of like the Gen Z kids that are getting back into Queen, or not getting back, getting into Queen because of the Bohemian Rhapsody movie. It's like all of a sudden everyone's singing the songs at the bar and it's like, wait, did you ever listen to them? And I think that movie made a huge difference in it.
That's the thing. I don't care how people get into these classic bands, just get into them. That's the way I always see it. There's different ways of doing it. People are getting into Ghost because of TikTok. And people are getting into Metallica because of Stranger Things, and Kate Bush because of Stranger Things. I don't care how you find them, just find them. And you'll find a whole new world of music you would never have found had it not been for you watching like Stranger Things like for like 2 minutes.
Well, speaking of Stranger Things too, I Shazammed a song when I was watching it and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is extreme. And I had no idea because, we've talked to them, but I didn't listen to the full discography. And I was like, wow, that's super cool. And so just, yeah, you're right. Think about all the people that are discovering the music just because of the pop culture of something else that's completely unrelated.
Exactly. Weirdly enough with Extreme, I first heard Extreme because of Bill and Ted.
Yeah.
Like I was like a 7-8-year-old kid, not even really into rock music yet. But apart from whatever my parents were playing, but then you hear something like Play With Me on Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and you're like,
me too, man.
What's that? I'm not even playing guitar or anything yet. I'm like years away from guitar yet.
How old were you before you realized that Beethoven was Nuno Bettencourt in that movie? Because I know so people that haven't seen Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, in the middle of the mall, they go back in time, and Beethoven's one of the characters. And he goes into a music shop and he starts playing on a synthesizer.
It's not played.
Synthesizer solo.
It's not played by Nuno though.
Oh,
Yes, it
that's
is.
why I got confused.
Yes, it is.
It is?
The solo that Beethoven plays is
The
Nuno
character. I'm
Betancourt's
saying the
guitar
character
solo.
isn't Nuno.
No, no. His character
That was
isn't.
why
But
I
when
got
he goes,
confused.
Yeah.
So when he goes into the music store, Beethoven plays "Play with Me," the guitar solo on the keyboard. And I used to think, I'm like, is that a cool keyboard patch or whatever? Like at 7 or what have you. And then later in life, I'm like, holy shit! That the best part of one of the reasons I played piano was watching that scene. And it's because I wanted to be Nuno Betancourt, and he's a guitarist. So
Exactly.
I didn't realize that till I was older that was actually Nuno, what Beethoven was playing on the synthesizer in the mall in the middle of that scene in Bill and Ted.
This is the thing. Like I've been very fortunate to be a guitar teacher now since like 2006, and I've seen many situations like this where kids are going, I want to pick up a guitar. They're either already having lessons with me and want to learn something by a particular artist because they've just heard them on TV or radio, or something's happened where all of a sudden that artist or that song is really, really big. Or they're complete beginners and they go, I want to play guitar because of this thing I saw on TV. And it always would happen. Like you've got like American Idol and stuff. We had like the Voice and all that kind of stuff. Every Monday morning after it aired on a Saturday, I'd have kids going, can you teach me how to play this song? And like when it's one kid, you're like, that's weird. When it was every single lesson, you're like, okay, something was on The Voice this weekend that made people want to play something on the guitar. It was like Fast Car, Tracy Chapman. They're like, can I learn how to play Fast Car? Like, where the hell have you heard Fast Car? Like, you're 7. Like, and you're going, okay, this is pretty cool. Like, and then, so all the people who like poo-poo these kind of things, I think, you know, yeah. The way I see it is just however people discover these great songs. They could just be great songs. I know kids who are just like, they only know Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush. That's the only song. But it's amazing how that like spreads into other songs, like whatever Spotify playlist has gone. Oh, you like that song?
As a teacher, that song's in like a crazy time signature. Is that one of those things where you had to sit down and be like, this is an 11/16? Is it like a good opening?
No. although saying that, there have been many situations where you do get into counting things with. It depends how long they've been playing. I will never force for theory on people. I just want to get them playing. But there are certain situations where, as they're progressing, you go, okay, now let's clap along with this. Let's clap along with Don't Give Up by Kate Bush and Peter Gabriel, and let's see that it's really never been in 4/4. And you only find out that it's never been in 4/4 until you're asked to count along with it.
Do you talk to Lars Ulrich about that, about Metallica, to count along with it, to figure out if he's actually playing Master of Puppets right?
Oh, we're getting into this debate now, are we?
Let's do it. Why not?
Oh no.
Do you have any? Do you think that Master of Puppets was deliberately written in a weird time signature, or that Lars was just on cocaine and speeding up?
Well, it's 3 bars of 4/4, 1 bar of 5/8, which isn't that crazy.
You see that in classical music all the time, yeah.
Exactly. That's just the way I see it. There's nothing crazy about it. It's just the fact that the riff is written and you put drums to the riff, and the riff wasn't in 4/4 to begin with. So it's not Lars's fault. Like, depending who you talk to, he plays out of time, and other people think he's a genius because he's in different time signatures.
Well, okay. How about the new Metallica song? How did that make you? Lux Eterna, because we were just talking to Shannon Larkin, who, by the way, I want to say this. It warms my heart because he's in the band and I'm friends with him. But that Godsmack has been number 1 on the charts for 5 weeks. Metallica dropped a song for the first time in like almost a decade. Not number 1. As a Metallica fan, that's unfathomable to me. Meanwhile, who's at number 1? Shannon.
Godsmack.
Still. And Shannon comes on, and it's so funny because he's like, they should have been number 1. But the fact is, like, they write heavy music, and I'm glad that they wrote such a heavy song this time that it wasn't number 1, because Surrender, which is the Godsmack song, is very catchy, whereas so is the Metallica song, but catchy to Metallica fans that Ride the Lightning. How do you feel about it?
I like it. I'm that weird fan who likes every Metallica thing, though. So I'm like the
Every?
person, I'm that fan.
The Lou Reed album that they did?
Oh yeah. I genuinely,
Really?
really, but because I'm a big fan of bands and musicians who don't do the same thing over and over again. And thank the Lord of rock and metal that we have bands like Metallica who go, you know what, we're so successful, we can do what the hell we want and keep life interesting.
Amen to that. I agree.
Because if every band and musician played it safe, it would be an incredibly boring planet to live on. And the reason Metallica are so big is because they take chances. I genuinely believe that. If they had not done the Black Album, they would have been forgotten about very quickly. They would have been one of those bands that we talk about. Weren't they great in the 80s? It's a shame they broke up in 1991. I wonder what would have happened to them.
I can tell you, they would make an album called Lulu with Lou Reed that's literally unlistenable. And I guess if you're like David Lynch, where you're like, let's just fuck with them. Let's just do the weirdest thing that we can. Let's go play a whole piano concert and not know how to play piano. Okay, you're right. It is interesting.
But this is the thing. I'd rather people try something new and it fails than play it safe.
I agree with that. You can't fight that.
The problem is with Metallica, that I think a lot of people have, is they try their luck every time there's a new album, which I like that. Even if it doesn't pay off, it's only an album. It's like when Queen released Hot Space and people lost their minds because it was like a disco record. And even Freddie was like, it's just an album. Like, calm down. The next one will be different.
Well, you know what, though?
That's a really great perspective.
The Hot Space record, it does sound like they went to Switzerland and did a bunch of cocaine with David Bowie. That's what it sounds like. I mean, Under Pressure, great song. But as a Queen fan, that's right under Flash Gordon for me as far as bullshit records. But I get it. And I remember Freddie Mercury on all those concerts in like 81, 82 being like, we're not a funk band. We're not a disco band. But at the time, you come out with Hot Space. It's understandable.
The Freddie Mercury impression there was absolutely spot on and was not at least offensive to anybody, to any Brit.
It would.
No,
it wouldn't be a 2020 episode if Ben didn't do some sort of offensive.
The irony is I hold Freddie Mercury in such reverence. And the fucked up part, and I'll show you this. My prized possession, my whole prized possession in my entire life is this signed Freddie Mercury Hot Space record.
No.
Yeah, so it's the only Freddie Mercury autograph I've ever been able to afford. But for my birthday the other year, I bought myself a signed Freddie Mercury Hot Space record. And I think it was the cheapest because it was the Hot Space record.
Probably.
No, actually, the funny part was the only way I was able to afford this is not getting a certificate of authenticity, because his autograph, especially after that movie, is this would be like maybe $7,000 or $8,000 for how big it is. But the guy I bought it from actually in '87 met him in the Antiques District, and I forget where it was, Kensington Market. I don't remember. They told me the whole story, and I actually had PSA, who does the autograph stuff. They looked at it before it was even shipped overseas, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's dead fucking real." So. I have a great story where basically Freddie Mercury in '87 showed up at an in the Antiques District somewhere. And the guy, the owner of the store was like, I had just bought this record, and ran out, and he was in his Rolls Royce, and he handed it through the window to him. And this is what he got back. And it's a huge ass Freddie Mercury autograph.
Wow.
So that's the Freddie on Hot Space.
That's amazing. That's really cool. I have a Brian May pick, and that's about all I have Queen related. I have many Queen things, but I actually have Brian May's sixpence that he used on stage.
Oh, nothing wrong with that.
That's
awesome.
Fucking awesome.
But there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of those in existence, so it's not really worth anything.
It's worth something to you.
It's worth something.
I think it's
in terms of
something.
Financially, it's not worth much.
Yeah,
but to me, it's worth everything. It's so cool. Plus, I've got one of those like kind of souvenir ones. Like instead of having the Queen's head on the coin, it's Brian's. That's really cool. But you have to buy that from a merch stand. So That was cool.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that though, man. Because I'll tell you, I love going to concerts at this point, and like, I would much rather buy an Yngwie Malmsteen signed record than actually have to go meet Yngwie Malmsteen. I'll tell you that. Like, sometimes I'm like, you know what? I don't want to meet these people, embarrass myself, and lower myself down and be like, hey, I've been a fan of you all of my life, and someone like Yngwie is like walking off. I'd rather just buy it and then not have that interaction at all. Well, no, he's not an odd example. In fact, he gave me the exact look and the exact feeling of I don't give a fuck about you when I did ask him for his autograph. And in fact, it was a weird instance, though, because it made me like him more, because it's like, oh, everything they say about him is true.
It adds to, now you've got to live out that thing of going, okay, people think I'm a dick, so now I have to be a dick. Otherwise, they're disappointed if I'm not a dick.
Well, to give you an idea how much of a dick he was, this is the funny story. So I'm at Generation X, and it's funny to see all these different guitar players, because it's Nuno Bettencourt, it's Tosin Abasi, it's Zakk Wylde, it's Steve Vai, and then you have Yngwie. It's like the greatest guitar symposium of all time. Well, Tosin, on the bus, no interest in anybody. You walk downstairs, Nuno Bettencourt's walking around with 3,000 Bettencourts and Sharons, so it's weird. It's like you just see all these different people. You're like, is that Nuno? Is that Gary? And it's never Nuno or Gary. It's just one of their brothers, because they have 1,000 of them. They're all super nice, and they all play instruments too, which is fucking crazy. So they all have bands. And then Steve Vai is like in his little dressing room and walks out like with his like whole gear on and all that. And Zakk Wylde wearing a fuzzy Viking helmet, going around just giving people big bear hugs. And then Yngwie Malmsteen. So here's the thing. When that tour went around, it was when a lot of those bands like had to tour together to get the audience. It was a really hard time in the music industry. So this is at the Chevalier Theater in Medford, which was like an old school or something. So Yngwie's literally in a legit broom closet, and he doesn't leave. I mean, the closet's like big enough for you to walk in. So he has this gopher like leaving like submarine sandwiches next to his door. You just see a hand go in and just pull it out. So me and my friend Alicia, we're waiting outside. We're like, where's this fucker going to go? It's just a closet. It's a broom closet. Zakk Wylde comes out, gives us hugs. Steve Vai comes out. I'm like, hey, man, Bohemian Rhapsody sounded great. He goes, well, none of these guys know how to read music, so I had to make tapes for all of them. And then continues unsolicitedly to tell me how he arranged all Bohemian Rhapsody and how they weren't ready to play it tonight, but they had to play it. Walks off. Nuno Bettencourt literally interrupts my conversation to ask Steve where more beer is. I'm like, thanks for ruining that, Nuno, as always. Yngwie won't come out. He comes out, sees me. I see him. Turns back around, literally walks back into the wall, shuts the door. Thinks I'm going to leave. I'm not going to leave. And I ask him for an autograph when he walks out again. He goes, 1 minute. So I hold it. I stay right in front of him, blocking him. He autographs it. I go, can I get a picture? He goes, you don't have your camera. I'm like, look. And Alicia had already had the camera ready. And you can see Yngwie. I'll send the picture to Corey because he looks so caught off guard. But so you know, he walked right out, all black, grabs his Ferrari luggage, walks outside to the bus, goes onto the bus. There's all these people behind the blockade. Yngwie with their Trilogy records, doesn't look at them, goes onto the bus, leaves his luggage outside. All this this smoke comes up like Darth Vader getting off the ship at the beginning of Star Wars. And then his gopher, runs up, throws it under the bus, and they drive off into the night.
You're probably on the do not admit list for all future Yngwie concerts.
It's a giant picture. It's that picture.
I wonder if Nuno tipped him off.
Dude, Nuno was getting Bettencourts and Sharon's beers and eating pizza. He didn't even know Yngwie was there.
There's definitely like department stores have the picture in the back room of like the people that aren't, like keep an eye on these people, shoplifters and whatnot. There's definitely like every tour manager has a picture of Ben somewhere in their in the bus or somewhere that's just like, keep an eye out for this dude. Like,
well, the first time I got kicked out of Backstage was by Steve Wood, our other British ambassador. He was being the tour manager for Megadeth in '98, and I went up to Dave Mustaine, and Dave didn't like it, so he said, "Out!" And Steve literally grabbed me by the scruff of my neck and kicked me out.
And look how far we've come.
And now he's like your best friend.
Yeah, Ben has a way with people, that's for sure.
He's managing Marty Friedman now, so
another person that probably doesn't want to deal with you.
He's he said to me, next time he comes to town, I should jam with him on stage. But now I don't think he realized it could be a possibility because in April, he's coming and opening for Queensryche. And I talked to Steve Wood, and Steve's like, you got to meet Marty. And I don't know. I don't think he wants to meet me. Why not? You know, I just don't get that vibe. I mean, I wanted him to come on 2020. Oh, he'll come on. I don't know about that, Steve. I'm his manager. Just ask him. See what he says. So we'll see. But apparently, Marty Friedman might be coming on, but I'm going to go right to Marty's face and ask him what he thinks about Lost Symphony in person. Stand like this. I
don't know if you guys checked out, Marty just posted a clip of him recording his Lost Symphony solo
I saw that.
Instagram.
Wow.
I was just scrolling through, and I'm like, oh, look, it's Marty shredding some ridiculous solo. I'm like, wait a second, that's our song.
Nice.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he can't
Very
be
cool.
He can't be that ashamed of us if he actually posted.
Or he's running out of content.
Why would he be ashamed?
Because he didn't write
What
it.
did you
You have
do?
to,
Anyone that's heard any of our episodes discussing the production process of Lost Symphony, working with a multitude of guest players, including Richard, there was some that went very smooth, like Richard, and there was some that were a challenge, and it took a lot of back and forth. And Marty did a lot. He did some arrangement and had notes on our own compositions. So
Yeah, he was heavily involved in
like a
every step of
teacher.
the process.
yeah,
It's like a teacher going, see me after class about your own song.
Basically. Well, Ben, I mean, yeah, we've talked about this a lot, but one of the first songs we did Requiem with him, he was very involved in the arranging side, and basically was like, no, this is actually your new intro. And then, I arranged all of the orchestra for it. And he's like, no, start over.
Wow.
well, here's what happened. We asked him to play on a song that was already like 8 minutes long or something, 7 minutes long. And he goes, cool. And then writes an intro that's 3 minutes long, not to a click track. And we're like, what is this? He goes, your intro. I'm like, but we asked you to play on the song. He goes, yeah, here's your intro. And we're like, okay. So then I made the worst mistake of our collective lives between me and Siobhán, because I was in Miami at that time. And I said, Siobhán, this is Marty Friedman. He's very musically sophisticated. We need to impress him. I want you to use all of your PhD university skills to write the most complex, harmonic, melodic response to what he's doing. So she wrote this really progressive, interesting thing for Marty. And just so you know, Marty had sent reference tracks. He goes, oh, you could do something like this. Now, unbeknownst to us, he's like Cartesian thought. They're illusion. Free will is just illusion. So when he says like these are just ideas, this is what he wants verbatim. Because when we sent it to him, like this beautiful thing that Siobhán, like, oh, Ben, this is going to knock his socks off. Oh, it knocked his socks off. He's like, this is all wrong. And it's the first time I've ever seen Siobhán actually get defensive and be like, it's not wrong. It's not what you were thinking of. And here's why. She actually wrote him like a proof of why it was like harmonically correct. It's just a matter of it wasn't what he was. Yeah, you're used to the Hirajoshi scale, okay, bro? Like your stupid Japanese pentatonic. I'm sorry that I went straight Locrian on you. Like, what do you want, Marty? I don't know what that means. It's not in the Ramones. And that's when I realized he has no music theory. He just does it all by ear, and his brain's that weird.
Yeah.
So,
Which is incredible because I'm not that way. And I always wonder how people do that. I've
Same.
worked like that, where it's like they are some of the best musicians I've ever worked with. I consider some of the best guitar players on the planet. And I'm like, how do you do that? And they're like, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Well, and I'll go, well, you're just using this scale. Like when you go into this arpeggio, what made you think of that? He went, I don't know what an arpeggio is. And it's like things like that. You're like,
Blows
okay,
my mind.
This is pure ear.
no, you're like Siobhán. So Siobhán is crippled with indecision by the fact that she knows all of the answers. So like me, where I don't even know like the difference between a quarter note and a 30-second note, other than the fact that there's 31 differences. I don't know the difference. So for me, like I play something. I remember one of my first guitar lessons, and I wrote something I think in 7/8, and my teacher was trying to show it to me in 4/4, and he's like, "No," and I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "It's odd time." I'm like, I don't know what you mean, because I didn't understand the way that, time signatures work. And then with Siobhán, because she knows so much music theory, because she's so studious, if you send her something, it's like, well, you could go this way. Well, you could do the half cadence. Well, you could do the whole cadence. Oh, well, you know what? But that's going to go into an augmented sound. And I don't think the augmented sound is going to sound good with the diminished sound 3 measures before. And then next thing you know, she's like, I can't do this.
Well, long story short with the Marty thing, I mean, it definitely opened my mind. But yeah, through the process, we discovered that we were just coming from totally opposite ends of the spectrum. But it helped because I think it forced me to get out of the rules, which is something that I was really impressed by with the way that he thinks, is like everything was so unexpected from the traditional musical theory standpoint.
Yeah, that track takes off and it goes in a direction that we would never have thought to go. And unfortunately, for anyone that wants to go check out Requiem by Lost Symphony, the part we're talking about that Siobhán composed is at the end of the song in its entirety, because we're not gonna throw this away. It's amazing. So you get to hear kind of like this Marty intro, and then we cap off like a bookend with Siobhán's interpretation of it, which is like, it's beautiful. So it's like, it's a friggin' adventure. That song's like what, 10,
like 12, maybe 12 minutes or
it's
something.
It's a long song, but it's a good one. Check it out.
Well, as requiems are, they are long with multiple movements. So
you're dead by the end of it.
I certainly was.
Yeah. But we're talking about Ben's writing odd time stuff, and I've figured it out after working together for so long that all of your odd time riffs are just because you don't have the attention span to wait till the next measure comes. So when we're working on songs like Acceptance, which Richard, you're featured on, I remember we're sitting in that room that you're in right now, Ben, with all the pianos, and we were working on that progression. And I'm like, oh, it's a really cool thing. And we're trying to hash it out. And then, so what we'd do is we would just hit record and then kind of vamp, and then we'd see, what we could take from that. And I don't think you played that in the same time signature once in 5 minutes. So we did, we went back and we're like, all right, well, sometimes you do it this way. Sometimes, this one kind of works with this one. We're going in and we're like, let's take this chunk. Okay, now it's in this. And then I still don't know what time signature that's in, but the one we picked, I think, worked out pretty well. So.
What is it like? Was it like a 15/16 or something?
I think it's like 4/4 with 5/4 alternating or something. There's some alternations in the.
I think there's some 5/4s in the solo section, if I remember correctly.
But that's what's exciting about it. I think you're totally right, and something that comes totally naturally to someone is, the most authentic music making there is in a lot of ways.
Well, I figured out how to fuck with Paul Lorenzo more, because he thinks in 1/1, so he just counts. And he's just like, okay, I'll figure out, right? So I took off an and on a new riff. I just took off an and. It wasn't even a whole beat. And he's like, what the fuck? But then I said, play it. But then he played it straight, and then it sounded like he was flipping the beat. And I'm like, oh, this is so cool. I'm going to keep writing things with the and missing. And he's like, don't ever do it again.
See, I love when drummers do that anyway. I think that's great. When you flip the feel.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Just play straight through.
I'm sending this right now to you, Richard. You'll appreciate this.
Well, that's what ended up happening when we did Decomposing Composers, and I did the Vivaldi thing. He turned a lot of it into a 3/4 rather than, or maybe 4/4 instead of 3/4 something, so he turned a big grouping of measures and divided it up totally differently than the traditional interpretation, which was so cool to me, because I'm like, wow, I never even thought about the fact that you can lump all these measures together and divide them up, and it's like a totally different rhythm and beat and like harmonic progress, everything.
But that's the thing where weirdly enough, you talk about that, I remember hearing when I was 12 years old, I heard Beatitude song by Steve Vai. I was like, what the hell time signature is that in? Not knowing what time signatures were until that moment, because I was like, what the hell? Yeah, think about that one if you know the song.
Yeah, I do know this song. I never even thought about it.
And it's one of the easiest riffs ever to play. It was the first Steve Vai riff I ever learned when I was 12 years old. Not realizing I was playing in 7/8, but the drums are in 4/4. Beat one, repeat. So it comes back around every 4 bars. It comes back around.
That's why I like playing in 13, and then I just make them catch up like few measures down the road. It's like, let's make them feel really uncomfortable. And then it's like, they meant to do this the whole time.
But the way I see it with odd time signatures anyway, and the reason why, Benny, you probably writing it and coming back to the whole Lars thing and James thing and Metallica, it's we don't talk in 4/4. So why is it weird when music isn't in 4/4? I find that really odd. When people I just play, I write something, and then they kind of have to, especially in this day and age, I've got to shoehorn it into the click track. Well, that doesn't. That's not in 4. I'll have to change my riff or whatever. It's like, no, the riff was great how it was. Like, why does it have to be in 4? We don't think in 4. We don't talk in 4. So what's the problem? We're changing it. Well,
it's exactly what happened when I was going to my first guitar lesson. Is I didn't think that way, and it didn't naturally, like, having listened to all the music growing up, I didn't go, this has to be in 4/4. I just wrote openly. But then when you're told everything must be in 4/4, and then you go listen to Pink Floyd Money, you're like, Money's one of the first riffs I ever learned. Dun, 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 dun. And you're like, that's totally simple. It's in 7/8. And I didn't think like that. And in fact, I had such bad rhythm for such a long time. I was constantly playing in the wrong time signature because I would lose a beat or gain a beat, and I couldn't hear it. I wasn't able to really even count music until like maybe a year ago when Shannon Larkin finally was like, oh, that's how you do it.
Yeah. This is why I'm obsessed with odd time signatures in terms of songwriting, because sometimes it comes from an incredibly pure place and sometimes it is calculated. Either way, as long as the end result's great. It's like, I think I was 26 when I realized All You Need Is Love isn't in 4/4.
Mm-hmm.
And things like that, where like this, he's working it out. He's working it out.
I didn't realize it at all.
The verse is in 7.
No, I just got that. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
This is what I love about the Beatles, and this is what I love about time signatures utilized properly.
Yeah.
Is you don't realize it because it feels natural and it grooves.
Well, it's the thing,
versus
the feel is what's important. It's just like the scale you pick, the key you pick, all that stuff goes into how you want the end, product of the song to make the listener feel. So I think, obviously 4/4 is so prevalent because it's comfortable, right? So if you're writing a pop song or something like country, and you want the listener to just be able to bob their head to the thing and remember the hooky parts. But if you want to branch out and you want to give someone a different vibe, a different feel that they're not expecting, and you're good and you can slip an odd time riff like subtly in a poppy sounding song, all of a sudden that song is going to stand out. They might not know why, but that song is always going to have something about it that the average listener is not going to be able to put their finger on, which is going to make it, rise above the noise. And that's why it's, I love hearing, I love progressive, crazy, shreddy stuff in odd times, but I also love, like something like the Beatles or song where it's popular and it's catchy, but it's still fucked up somehow. And no one knows why, but everyone loves it for some reason.
Do we not remember that Richard's first foray into the Lost Symphony universe was Premeditated Destruction?
I wouldn't call that pop. Yes.
Yeah, it's not pop, but it's in 13/8 because my brother, who co-wrote it with me, is one of those guys that's like, well, if we take off a beat here, it's really gonna fuck with him. And he made it so weird that we're like, that's really awesome and disconcerting and jarring. And nobody wanted to play over it. I think I sent it to like Tracy G from Dio and some other, and they're like, oh, I don't feel this at all. I tried having Jimmy Bell play over. He's like, I don't feel this at all. And then these are great guitarists. Richard, what he sent back to us, working with his buddy Danny, who, by the way, is a great guitarist and is writing awesome songs with Richard. And I'd love for you to talk about that. What you sent back, I literally looked at Corey and said, is this guy even really playing this? And it took you sending the video before I realized it wasn't just like a studio wizardry. It's so good.
Thanks.
How did you approach the 13/8 part to Premeditated Destruction? Guys, it's on, I think, is it chapter 1 or 2? Chapter 2?
Chapter 1.
Chapter 1, Premeditated Destruction, Lost Symphony, lostsymphony.com. There's a section in the middle, and you'll hear it. That's absolutely wild, 13/8. And that's Richard's first solo. And it's, to this day, one of the most impressive things of anything that I've been a part of. Can you explain how you wrote that?
Well, first of all, thank you, because you've worked with some absolutely monster guitar players. So thank you. That means a lot. Can I be completely honest with you? When I was soloing over it, I had no idea what time signature it was in.
Even better. It doesn't matter.
That's why it works.
I had no idea. I basically just sat with it and had it on a loop for quite a while. Not even with a guitar in my hand. I just was like, let me just get this feel in my head. And then after about 5 or 6 loops of it, I feel like I've got the kind of feel down. Then I get into specifics of, okay, what can I do over that, either rhythmically or scale-wise or whatever? Like, what's going on harmonically? Even with that, again, without a guitar, it sounds like it's in this kind of scale, this kind of mood. Yeah, moods and modes with Alex Golnick, all that kind of stuff. So it's, and that's kind of how I analyze it. I don't sit with a guitar for a while. I just loop it and just go, let me absorb the feel of it, the mood of it. And then I'll pick up a guitar and go, because I don't have perfect pitch. So it's like, okay, well, I think it's in this key, but let me see. I know I can do this from a relative pitch perspective, but I don't know until I actually pick up the guitar what key it's actually in. And then I'll just kind of improvise around it in the same way we're improvising a conversation right now. We improvise every single day. I just do it with the guitar instead. And so I never really thought of it as being in an odd time signature. I just kind of, there'd either be something in the drums that would give away, okay, here's beat 1 again. And I'll just make sure I land on a particular note or a particular thing I want to do. There we go. Now, here we go. And that's the kind of way I saw odd time signatures for the longest time anyway. I think it's grown up a Metallica fan when you realize. And then when you learn what odd time signatures are, you're like, oh, okay, I've been doing that forever without really thinking about it.
You know, as someone that did get formal training, where did you gain those skills of how to improvise? And I mean, are you aware of what you're drawing from when you do that? Because I would say as a classical player, that's really hard for me. You know, regardless of the time signature, knowing what's going on is the ability to find something from outside that to pull into what you're working on in an improvisational sense.
Yeah, I mean, this has changed a lot over the years, and I'm still working on it. I'm still practicing it like every day. But one thing that I found was really, really bizarre that really helped me. I can't even remember where I heard this, but it really helped. And I tell a lot of my students this, even though it sounds really creepy to say it out loud. Here's your blabbermouth headline. But when I'm improvising, I actually picture different guitar players. So when I'll start a solo, I might be thinking, okay, this isn't like a hard and fast rule, but whichever person comes to mind, it'll be like, okay, I'll start off with Steve Vai, and it will be followed by Samantha Fish, and and then it becomes like I'm doing like my really best attempt of sounding like this person, but it always never ends up sounding like this person because I can't sound like this person. But the inspiration's there. It's almost like, well, what would Joanne Shaw Taylor do? Okay, she'll do a lot of double stops, so I'll do a lot of double stops here. Okay, now Nuno, what would Nuno do? A lot of string skipping. Okay, I'll go into a string skipping kind of thing. And it sometimes it can sound a bit forced, and sometimes it surprises me how much that actually flows.
I think you just explained how someone really gets their sound, because everybody, and you said this on the show, which I really respect your teacher. Your teacher said, if you're going to write music that hadn't been done before, it wouldn't be recognizable as music.
If it's truly original. Yeah.
Truly original. Right. So everything that we do, I call it like a buffet. I take a little bit of Brian May, take a little bit of David Gilmour, I take a little bit of, John Petrucci, and it's like it's my own thing. And that's kind of what you're doing, because what people don't forget is the X factor are your fingers. So even if you're playing a John Petrucci riff, if I play it, still sounds like Benny, unfortunately. Yeah. You know what I mean? I mean, there's some guys like Joey Concepcion who we're friends with. He's got like an Ouija board where his skill for me is like he can literally almost imitate any guitar. It's like sound like John Sykes, and he shakes it like John Sykes. But when you get a guy like that, like Paul Gilbert, I remember I had a conversation one time with Gary Cherone, because he's played with the Eddie Van Halen, Paul Gilbert in a Who cover band, and Nuno. And I asked him, who's like the most ferocious of those guys to play with? And he's like, well, Eddie was the biggest genius, but like he'd be crazy for a bit, and then he'd just puke out genius, but then it was like weird for days. So he's cool and crazy genius, but not like consistent. Nuno He said always was just ferocious, period. And that Paul could play anything, but he'd tell you most people don't know what he sounds like. He's trying to, it's like, oh, that sounds like Yngwie. That sounds like Steve Vai. Very few people hear Paul Gilbert that don't know Paul Gilbert and go, that's Paul Gilbert, even though he's one of the greatest guitarists, because he's conquered music and he's conquered this ability to sound like anybody to the point where he sounds like everybody other than Paul Gilbert, unless you know that Paul Gilbert's the ultimate buffet guitarist. Does that make sense?
Makes complete sense to me. Yeah. And that's where I feel like I've always fit in. I don't feel like I have a sound, and I've always been trying to get it, but in a funny way, what people may associate with me having a sound is me trying to find a sound. So I accidentally sound like myself while I'm trying to find what myself sounds like.
Do you want to know what your sound is? I'll tell you. I said
that made some kind of sense.
Your sound, for me, as a third-party omniscient who's worked with all these guitar players, I think that you're the shreddy Dave Gilmour. That's what you sound like to me, because when you play, the thing that typifies Gilmour for me is the fact that his note choice and his bends are so perfect that he can do 7 minutes of Shine On Your Crazy Diamond before anyone sings, and you're not like, I need to go take another hit of nitrous to get through this. Like, it's absolutely gorgeous, and it's enthralling. Every single note, if you listen to Comfortably Numb, a first-year guitar player can learn that solo. They can't learn the finesse for which he plays, but it's not hard. The difference with you is if you took that and then you applied, let's say, the technicality of a Nuno or a Marty Friedman and put it behind it, but then had the restraint of Gilmour. That, for me, is what you sound like. It's just like if Dave could play a little bit crazier and went into that Nuno realm, but your note choice, for me, sounds like Pink Floyd.
Well, thank you. I guess, it does mean a lot. But the only thing for me, and I don't think a lot of soloists talk about this, soloists are only as good as the band. So you could have the greatest guitar solo on the planet, but you take the harmonic backbone away, it'll sound pretty dreadful. It's like, here you go, here's the solo. It's like you listen to Hotel California without any chords behind it. You're like, this sounds dreadful. All of a sudden,
where are you listening to Hotel California without chords? You're like in a fucking elevator somewhere, and they're like, is that the solo from Hotel California?
YouTube.
Just soloed?
YouTube.
How many floors until the top?
Like, YouTube is my friend when it comes to things like that. When I, as a guitar teacher, and for this like new project I've got next month, like finding isolated guitar tracks is brilliant. So it's great when you strip away the drums, bass, vocals, everything, orchestra, whatever it happens to be, and you're left with the guitar solo. You go, this makes zero sense. This is the greatest guitar solo of all time. With no chords. Yeah. It sounds really weird.
That happened to me once, Richard. We had to do a cover of I'll Wait by Van Halen. And I said, you know what? I'll play the Michael Anthony part. Most people don't even think that song has bass. Yeah. Because it's just like the keyboard. Let me tell you, it is mostly dun, dun, dun. But there are some fucking wild ass runs that if you go and solo what Michael Anthony does, and by the way, the keyboards make no sense. Like, that song sounds like it makes sense. That's the thing that's crazy about Van Halen. He does these keyboard things and they sound totally normal and very pop oriented. And if you like acknowledge the fact that he might play in 4/4, but he does these weird groupings of notes and they're like all over the place. It's wild. So I totally understand what you're saying, because when I went and learned this Michael Anthony part, which I thought any idiot could play, oh no.
Learning Van Halen, aside from learning like the guitar parts, I play bass in an 80s hair band, and we do, a couple of Van Halen tracks. Try to play the backing to the solo in Hot for Teacher. Makes no goddamn sense. And then somehow it all comes together. But me and the drummer, every time we get to that part, we just look at each other like, I'll see you in a few bars, bro. Like, what's that? Like, I don't know. We got a few measures of chaos, and then we'll get back to it. But like, it's deceptively insane. All of everyone focuses on Eddie, but the rhythm section of Van Halen is pure goddamn chaos that comes out shining like a diamond. It makes no sense to me, but it's perfect.
That comes from the old school, where it was like, we're going to write this song. in a practice room, amps cranked to 11. We can't hear what each other's actually doing, but we're just going to do it purely on feel. And then when we get to the studio, we'll go, oh, crap, you're playing something different to me. And then we'll figure it out. And then whereas now everything is to a click, everything's remote. It's like, okay, well, I don't know what you're doing. Even to the point where people go, I have tabs. That makes me laugh.
Well, let me ask you this, because the new Metallica song, people are complaining. Because, okay, so for years, people said that Saint Anger was the worst drum sound ever and all of that, and that Lars's timing is terrible. In fact, I actually think, having seen Metallica live 24 fucking times, that one of the greatest things about James Hetfield being the greatest rhythm players ever is the fact that he makes Lars sound more in time than he actually is, and he's the guitarist. But the new song, people are complaining, sounds sampled and quantized versus out of time and terrible.
But
Can
when
Lars
any
not
other
win?
metal band does it, it's perfectly acceptable.
Yeah.
That's what really annoys me about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Why is it acceptable for every other band to do it and nobody talks about it? Yet Metallica do it. And that's it. They're awful. It's like, hang on.
We were talking with Shannon kind of about this briefly, but I think it's because Metallica's too popular. They have such a large fan base that it's impossible. It's like trying to get, like an entire country to agree on a candidate, right? You either like Metallica as a polished, like produced, like band like that, or you like the dirty garage rock, and there's no middle ground. So everything they release is going to immediately have half their fans hating it. It's like there's no winning in that situation.
Or you have Richard that just loves everything like Lulu and Saint Anger. Yeah. And there's like guys like me that are like, oh no, that's a part of my life I push down, like the memories at camp. Yeah. And I'm a Metallica fan. He's a staunch Metallica fan.
At my age, my first Metallica record was the Black Album. I fucking love that album. It is perfection on production. And, if I talk to any of like my older friends that like, got into Metallica on the earlier days, like, oh, that's bullshit. Like, that's not real. I'm like, I don't care what it is. It's perfect and it's amazing. And they should, and James's voice when it's produced and harmonized is the greatest thing I've ever heard. But then, they go more of that like raw style, and it's just, you can tell it's just him yelling into a microphone. And it's like, all right, this sounds like a garage band. If it wasn't Metallica, it's good, but if it wasn't Metallica, it wouldn't be this like iconic thing on a lot of those songs, in my opinion.
Well, as a testament to that, the first harmonies I remember as a child, because it's 91, so I was probably 8. I used to listen to a little mono boombox, and I remember taping The Unforgiven and thinking that the harmonies in Unforgiven, so like I'm a Jew, I grew up singing Jewy tunes in a synagogue, and there was these beautiful harmonies. I remember thinking, oh yes, I learned them, and I remember hearing the first time I sang harmonies with other people, and I was like, oh, this is a power. And then I heard that same thing from my Jew tunes, the harmonies in The Unforgiven. I'm like, this is so pretty. And I remember being at like 1 o'clock in the morning, hearing it on the radio, going to my boombox that already had the 90-minute cassette tape, and like trying to record it so that I can understand why I loved it so much. Because the production on that record and the harmonies, and when James's voice is produced, it's almost unparalleled.
Exactly. Just out of curiosity, Siobhán, do these kind of conversations happen in the classical world?
Absolutely. I mean, well, when we were talking about earlier about guitar solos and taking it out of context, I mean, that immediately made me think about the orchestra world and, the difference between violinists and all the other instruments. And one thing that I would say made me a better orchestrator or arranger was having played viola for so long, because violinists have always been in the world of melody and everything's about them. And, there's a pretty limited perspective when you spend your whole life playing the leads. And the magic of so much classical music and, even other music that's violin centric, let's say, is the way it's orchestrated around that, and when you take all of that away, a lot of it doesn't make sense. So I gained a massive appreciation from playing non-violin instruments like piano and viola and just being friends with a lot of the people that were the support players. So yeah, I mean, similar conversations. There isn't as much controversy, I guess, around classical albums because it's a pretty limited supply. There are a few classical labels and it's a lot of the same artists for a long period of time and everyone's following tradition. So there isn't a huge amount of risk taking, I would say. everything's pretty conventional. So
we love the other thing I was going to ask you, Siobhán, if you don't mind. We know how we're talking about how the old school guys get into a room and jam, and these kind of things kind of naturally happen just from gigging relentlessly. They would work out songs in front of an audience for years before they record a note, but now you can't do that thanks to YouTube. That's why nobody ever plays anything. But in terms of you working with, because I know you did things like the Queen's Gambit, just out of curiosity, how did that work in terms of doing it for Netflix? Was it actually in a room, everybody together, and you're just told this, or is it purely remote? If it is remote, or if it is 100% live, what changes have you seen over the years, especially pre and post COVID? I'm very curious how it works with like film and TV music, if it's similar to the rock and metal world in terms of its remote use of remote recording.
I think definitely the use of remote recording is more prevalent. I think just with the presence of technology and the fact that, especially with film, and at least of my involvement in the Queen's Gambit, it was primarily led by the composer. So he worked with the people on the team for that series, but he was basically largely in creative control of what was going on. And then my involvement was mostly with the solo violin stuff. So I actually worked directly with him in his studio here in Miami and recorded, and he kind of coached me through the pieces that I was doing. And then there was a whole orchestra, I think overseas in Europe somewhere, where they recorded all together in a studio, and that was directed by a conductor. And so there was a lot that was being done remotely. And I think especially when it comes to things that have large orchestral scores, for budget reasons, I think a lot of things are done overseas. And I've heard other people talk about this, and we might have even talked about this on the show, where it's like you can actually contract amazing orchestras in Europe that actually charge less than
Shota Nakama.
Yeah, that's right.
Shota Nakama did the Jason Becker record. I think it was it Sarajevo, Bosnia?
Yeah, something like that.
So you can get these unbelievable, these Slavic players that are better than all of us slobby Americans for, rubles on the penny. Out overseas. And I know that Shota has flown overseas multiple times to do orchestra stuff, because it's just, the US, we want to pay people here. So why not go to Bosnia and give 2 cents to someone who can play Paganini by 7?
Well, plus there's a lot of different it's different from when you're thinking about rock bands or people that are writing music together. This is largely, there is a composer who is basically in creative control, and then there are contracted players that are, performing the score that's already there. So, for most of the classical instruments, that's what's happening. You're not always getting any creative input. You're mostly the pawn of the composer.
Yeah. Now, I was very curious to see how these things have worked, especially like with technology, because we talk about it in terms of the rock and pop and metal world, but it is every single genre. I'd be curious to speak to some jazz guys and see how they feel about remote recording.
I think
jazz guys wouldn't use a computer. That's too
exactly.
You know what I mean? It's like to be together. Yeah,
exactly.
So listen, guys, we're coming up on the end of part 1 here. So we clearly have much more to dive into in part 2, but let's just wrap this one up real quick.
Well, I was going to say one of the most interesting things, just to dovetail off that last thing.
Just add more extension on the end of the...
Yeah, totally. Well, because it's important, because we had Marco on, who worked with Madonna, and we had Shota, who worked with Jason Becker, and they both had the same issues where people had programmed things using fake instruments, VST instruments. And then when they brought their real instruments in, Madonna, for example, sat there with Marco, literally sitting in a giant theater or whatever, or arena, and saying, can you make it sound like this? And they had used a patch. And Mariko, who's one of the greatest cellists literally in history, is like, I'm trying, but she couldn't imitate the fakeness of MIDI. And I know that when Shota went over and did the Jason Becker stuff, the guy who was doing a lot of the arrangements, who works with Jason, doesn't do a lot of real orchestrations outside of that. So he was saying stuff like, could you imitate the way that the MIDI stops here and all of that, as opposed to the natural sound of an orchestra? And that blew my mind, because you have a lot of people who are programming this stuff and saying, play it like this. Like my brother to Siobhán, he sent her a bunch of music from Lost Symphony, and she's like, this isn't even for a violin, because Brian doesn't know better.
Yeah, well, it's demoitis, right? You get used to listening to this thing that you programmed, and then, hey, you're not playing it like I programmed it. It's like, well, then just keep that and save your money, We can dive more into that in the next episode, though. But we're gonna stop now. Richard, where can people find you? And I know you're big on the lessons right now, and so I'm sure our listeners might want to get in touch with you about that.
Everything's pretty much through my Instagram and Facebook. I don't have an official website or anything like that. So Richard Shaw Guitarist on both Facebook and Instagram.
You don't want a website? Go check out like Wix.com or something. You could have that.
My life is too busy without having to maintain more things. And I do have that book out. That's available now on Amazon.
Yeah, if you can't afford to get the incredible lessons of Richard Shaw, because you might be a guitarist and you're just trying to get food in your refrigerator, spend the $20. Go on to Amazon and buy this book. It is so illuminating. It tells you everything that you like, all the stuff we're talking about, like modes and feels and basic music stuff that for years you've been faking that you think you know. This explains it in guitar terms, like, hey, you know that song? You know what that sounds like? That's this. And I got to tell you, I learned a lot from this book as a total pedestrian guitarist. I can now be even more dangerous when I speak with Siobhán.
Fretboard and Songwriting Theory for Metalheads by Richard Shaw.
And we'll have a link to that in the description. Richard, thanks for hanging with us. We'll see you next week. Guys, check out 2020-d.com, and we'll see you next time.
Oh, I mean, but the shows were killer. And then you're like, so the very first one was sold out. It was like 12,000 people or something. And we were supposed to do a Pantera set with Phil Anselmo. And they didn't tell anybody until after Zach Hall was done that he didn't show up.
Oh, my God.
So now you've got 10,000 people in Romania chanting Pantera, and the bodyguards are like, lock yourselves in the dressing room. I'll let you know when it's safe to come out.